Hi there, welcome to the channel. My name's John and I'm your host. Today I'd like to talk about albums or singles that had an impact in your life. Now there comes a time in all of our lives when we discover our own musical tastes. We're not influenced by our parents or our peers, but there's that eureka moment for all of us when we're listening to something, a particular genre, band, whatever, and we think, this is it. This is the music I like. This is the sound I'm really drawn to. Now, for me, this was way back in the 80s when a friend of mine gave me a copy of a single called Rockin' All Over the World by Status Quo. This single was the gateway for me into classic rock and 80s hair metal. I remember getting this single and I was playing it on an old Dansette record player. And I remember listening to it and thinking, this is really great. I loved it. It was just this driving rhythm. I had no idea until years later that the song was originally recorded by Creedence Clearwater Revival. So anyway, that song, it was a bit of a game changer for me. And I loved it. I used to play it, constantly. So that was my first sort of real memory of discovering music that I liked. And from then on, I tried to listen to as much sort of rock music as I could. Mainly, it was, through radio. There used to be a rock show here in the UK on a Friday night. It was called the Friday Night Rock Show with a guy called Tommy Vance. And I got most of, the sounds that I wanted to hear from that actual radio station, that actual radio show. So I was then introduced to bands, like Rush and Saxon and the Scorpions, all those sort of guys. But anyway, further on in my teens, I remember it was a summer and our geography teacher, in his wisdom, had decided to set for something to do, I believe he said, over the summer holidays, which basically means homework. A project, a geography project, a subject I absolutely hated anyway, but it wasn't just a project as in, a 2-page essay, for instance. It was a project that involved pictures, maps, all sorts of stuff. And I got to be honest, to me, it was like, thanks, how do you ruin a kid's summer holiday? I know, I'll set them a geography project, so thanks for that. Anyway, there was actually a time of respite through all of this, and that was when a family friend decided to pop round to the house, and on his visit, he gave me a copy of John Lennon's single Imagine. And I will always remember him saying to me, whatever you do, John, be careful of the B-side and don't play it too loud if your parents are in the vicinity. So I was curious about this. So I enjoyed listening to Imagine. Great song. Absolutely one of the best songs of all time, in my opinion. And the B-side was Working Class Hero. So I started playing it. Quite enjoyed it. But it was the first time, and I was quite shocked. I remember being really shocked, actually, that, I'd never heard somebody swear on record. And I was like really taken aback. And so I just remember, for me, that memory of that single and actually that geography project is not so much the geography project, but actually listening to the B-side of Imagine and hearing John Lennon using the F word. So on from there, the only other time I remember being subjected to hearing, swearing on a record, it wasn't sort of, as prevalent then as it is today, was when my best mate down the road, who happened to be a Sex Pistols fan, had got a copy of the The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, which was absolutely littered with profanities. So yes, that was the next time that I was subjected to hearing a whole barrage of swear words on record. And yeah, that was the last time until I bought Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. And then it was deja vu. But anyway, as I went through life, I discovered another group that I really, really loved. And that was the Beatles, probably the greatest band in the 20th century, really. Again, that's only my own personal opinion, but I don't think anybody has ever reached the heights that they have, produced so many different genres of music through, the short space of time that they were together and the amount of albums that they brought out. And so one of my passions, as I got on in my teens, was listening to the Beatles and desiring to get material by them. As it happened, a friend of mine in school was a huge Beatles fan. Now, this was 1982, which was really the year of the mod ska revival in the UK. So he was listening to the Beatles a lot, and he'd got all the vinyl albums, all the singles, and I thought, well, I'd really like to sort of hear more of these guys. So my first real experience of them was when I'd got hold of a tape called Rock and Roll Volume 2. And it was on cassette, as I say, and it was focused mainly on the later half of their career. And I remember listening to this and thinking, yeah, these guys are really good. These guys are really good. So as time progressed, I thought, right, I want to get some vinyl albums of these guys. And in the UK, there used to be a store called Millet's. Their main products for sale were things like tents and outdoor equipment and, that sort of thing. But at the back of their store, in my town where I live, they had a selection of music. They had not CDs at that. Yeah, they did have CDs at that point, actually, or did they? I can't remember now. But I know for certain they had vinyl, because I remember going in there and I saw that they got some Beatle albums. So I went and purchased 2 albums. I got Beatles for sale and With the Beatles. Now, my only complaint about both of these albums is that they were released on the EMI Greek label. Now, I wasn't fully aware of the fact that the Beatles albums and singles were released on Parlophone. So to be honest, I did feel somewhat cheated when I discovered that the pressings I had were actually EMI Greece, or the EMI Greek pressings. Nonetheless, I was quite pleased to have got these albums, and I've no idea how much they're worth, if they're worth anything at all, but I'm still glad that I've got them. And one of the tracks that I will always remember playing to death was Don't Bother Me by George Harrison. Now, I recall in interviews that he didn't really particularly like that song that he had written, but for me, I absolutely loved it. I don't know what it was about it, but I think, to be honest, if I think back, it probably had a bit of a sort of an Eastern sort of vibe even back then. And, as I say, I just played it to death. I really did. You know, I'm sure I drove my parents mad. But anyway, to me, it was a great song, and I was quite pleased to have both of these albums. So there you go. Also, though, at that time, I did purchase this album, noted to be by the Silver Beatles, and at the time, I was unaware that the material on this was actually from way before they were famous. And truth be told, the only reason I did buy this disc was the fact that it was a picture disc, and to me it looked cool. I still like it. I've hardly ever played it, if I'm honest. You know, not really a huge fan of their really early stuff, but it's yeah, it's, to me, as I say, it's more about the fact that it's a picture disc, and you know, I fell in love with it when I saw it, and that's all there is to really say about it, to be honest. So anyway, moving onwards, into my late teens and 20s, when I gained employment, I was getting more and more into sort of classic rock, and as I say, into the hair metal movement. You know, groups such as Poison and not so much Motley Crue. They were never my thing. But yeah, certainly Poison, Cinderella, those type of guys. But one group that I did really take to um, was, and is still actually, Van Halen. Now, I remember listening to this very first, to their very first album, and being totally blown away by it. Not so much by Eruption, which is, you know, phenomenal, and obviously at the time, it was mind blowing. Nobody had ever really heard anybody play guitar like that before. But all the tracks on this debut album, and it probably is one of the greatest debut albums ever recorded. Um, you know, all of the songs on it, such as Running with the Devil, you know, Ain't Talking About Love, On Fire, all of these songs are just blistering. I mean, it's a complete raw album, and it's fantastic. Everything on it is just amazing, you know, to the point where I remember listening to this. Then I got Van Halen 2 and Women and Children First, and I was like really sort of actually quite disappointed in a way, because I expected the same rawness and energy on those albums that were on the very, very first album. But, you know, again, not only did I get the debut album, I went on to collect all the other albums, you know, the Roth era and the Hagar era, and very pleasantly surprised that, you know, the last album that they made was with David Lee Roth, A Different Kind of Truth, and I loved that album. I really did. The next album on my list was a group that I was introduced to by some people I worked with. Now, the one guy was a massive Deep Purple fan, and he absolutely loved Machine Head, and he said how wonderful it was. And yes, it's got, you know, Smoke on the Water, Highway Star, which is it's a stellar tune. Love it. But I've got to be honest, the album that really, really impacted me and I thought was better than Machine Head is and was Deep Purple in Rock. Now, again, I think it's the fact that the sound on this is just so raw. You know, Gillan's vocals, Ian Pace's drumming is absolutely superb. To me, Deep Purple in Rock is just phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And to me, it does rank higher than Machine Head. As good as Machine Head is, I think Deep Purple in Rock is better. And actually, Deep Purple in Rock, along with Burn, when Coverdale and Hughes came into the fold, um, to me, yeah, those are my two favourite Deep Purple albums. Another group that I got into, that really branched off from my love of classic rock and hair metal, so to speak, were the Doors. Now, again, this first album by the Doors, their debut album, I believe, probably is in the list of the greatest debut albums ever recorded, along with, as I say, Van Halen 1, you know, Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. They all rank up there. There was some sort of magic going on when these guys recorded their first albums anyway. But yeah, I love this album. You know, Break On Through, Light My Fire, 20th Century Fox, The Crystal Ship, and my all-time favourite Doors song, The End. And I was introduced really to these guys, not only through classic rock but also I remember watching Apocalypse Now, and The End was playing at the start of the film, and I remember listening to it, and I thought, wow, that song sounds so strange, but it seemed to fit in. It seemed to me to fit in with the whole time period of when the Vietnam War was going on. And it was really that song that got me seriously listening to the Doors. And so, yeah, this album again will be to me one of those albums that has a real special place for me, to be honest. And thanks to Apocalypse Now as well. And finally, as I say, that this list is not exhaustive, but these are the albums really that have come to mind on this short journey. And the next one is Rush's 2112. The first time I heard Rush was at, again, a family friend, that same family friend, funnily enough, who gave me the Imagine single. Now, I remember hearing some of those tracks by Rush, some of the tracks on their first three albums. This person had, there was a collection, they brought out their first three albums in a box set with a black cover, and I can't even recall its name now. Archives, I think it was. Archives. And anyway, I listened to these songs, and I said to him, who's this? And he said, oh, it's a band called Rush. So as time, went on, I thought, I'll give these guys a listen. And believe it or not, my very first Rush album was 1985's Power Windows. That will hold a special place for me because it was the first Rush album that I ever bought. And over the years, it really grew on me. But then I discovered their more classic rock side, and I bought 2112. It wasn't an easy listen, and it took me quite a while to get into it. But, I can appreciate these days why it is the classic album that, defines Rush, really. And especially, their more proggy years. So, and yeah, when you think that they were going to throw the towel in after their Caress of Steel album, which came before this, you can't help but admire the guys for thinking, well, we're going to still stick to our formula. And they did. And, it's since become the classic that it is. 2112 by Rush. Anyway, thank you for listening. And, to my memories and albums that mean a lot to me, and singles. And if you like what you've seen, consider hitting the like button and subscribe. And hopefully, I'll see you on the next one with more albums. Could be a ranking, could be a review of something. Who knows? But thanks for watching. See you later.